and welcome to the second of our Spirit of Place conversations, Secrets of the Wild Colonial Club. My name's Stacey Bobiel. I'm the Program Manager for Lorne Sculpture Biennale this year, and also Chief Blue Tapper and lots of other things. So, welcome everybody. We're hoping to have a really lively and engaging conversation and walk down memory lane, honouring the history of this very important night spot and social place in Lorne. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we present today, now known as Lorne, and I acknowledge the traditional owners as the custodians of the land and seas. Without further ado, I will hand over to Peter Lamell, who will introduce our panel today. Peter's going to be facilitating the sorts and running the conversation. So thanks very much for coming. I hope you enjoy it.
If you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. Now, who said that? Paul Kantner of Jefferson Airplane. And this is why I'm wearing this t-shirt. Has anybody heard of Iron Butterfly? Oh yeah, few. So they came to do their album. They were so stoned and out of it that the title of the song was In the Garden of Eden. But they kept on saying, in a garden to be the baby. So, and then they sort of thought, oh, how do we stop playing? We're a bit stoned. So they noodled on for 18 minutes. And that's how it was in the 60s. But we don't want to talk about those losers over in the US or the UK, because in the 1960s, Lorne was the centre of the universe, wasn't it? Now, who was here in the 60s? Hands up. Wow. And who went to the Wild Colonial Club and the Arab in the 60s? Now, who here really wishes that they'd been here in the 60s, but they're just too young? No. Oh, dear, oh dear, oh dear. Now, that's enough about me. Poor me, I was just slumming it in the UK in the 60s, changing the world, all that kind of thing that we got up to in the UK. But we got this fabulous team here who are going to give us all the stories. So can I introduce them? Can I start with Deborah Halpern? And Deborah, you are pride of place because what is the name of your precinct in the sculpture event?
Ghost.
And what do you have there? What location are you?
Hang on, I'm told I have to use... recording it. Oh, all right. He hasn't got a mic.
I've got a loud voice. Can you hear me in the back? Yes.
So what was the question? Where am I? I'm down on the foreshore, more or less where the Wild Colonial Club was. Yep.
Okay, so that was Wild Colonial Club with connections. Then we got Don Hirst, who was in and the main drive behind the spinning wheels, which in the mid-60s was on a par in Australia with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Number 3.
Is this on? No, it's not. Can you hear me with this microphone? No. Sound man? 1, 2. Yes, I had a group started doing Rolling Stones sort of music, and we'll get to this later on, but then at the end, that was early 64. At the end of 1964, Alison Robin Smith hired us to play at the Wild Colonial Club, replacing the trad jazz bands that had been there since 1958.
Thanks, Don. And Murray, now, if you want to know anything about the 60s, about surf, about Lorne, it's Murray. And I owe Murray one of the best parties I ever had. because you helped me get the strobe lights.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it goes back to a checkered career going to discotheques in Melbourne and at the Wild Colonial.
And thanks, Murray. And now we couldn't do this without the Smith family, could we? So we've got Emma, Laing, and Lara Nicholls. How many people from the Smith family here, by the way?
Oh, well done.
Oh! Yeah, well done, Smith family. So, Emma and Lara, we look forward to hearing from you and all the stories of the family. So, Emma, can we start with you? What was oh, by the way, how are we going to do this? Well, we've got the experts up here, the front panel, and they're going to give us some real words of wisdom. But my God, we've got all you people here, all you people from the 60s, so we're going to expect you all to contribute. Now, just to make sure that you contribute, I did a lot of study. I've got 1 million questions here to ask you all, so none of you are going to be able to get away without saying anything. So anyway, Emma, back to you. Talk to us about the creation of the Arab, the A-bomb, and all the stories behind it.
Okay, so, and Lara will be then
going back. Over to Lara.
That's right, because Lara will go back even further to what was happening around the whole creation of it as well. So I guess one thing I want to say at the beginning though is I look out across this crowd and we are all like a piece of a mosaic, like the beautiful ones that you make. And so we're all going to be filling in a bit of that mosaic story. And as we talk, it would be great for some of our family members also to jump in because they've got part of that picture. So, you know, I think one of the things is our grandmother and grandfather were quite extraordinary characters, and Lara will talk more about the beautiful home they had out on the hill at Caprington and what that was like. But it was really magical for us as children, and magical, I think, for all of them. And these three brothers were, if you like, went through this boundary of this incredible creativity that our grandmother had. They all moved down there when their father was 45. He'd retired early. But the creativity that was around these boys, and the way they all complemented each other, they had facets of their personalities that, if you like, sparked off each other. And Graham, and I hope Lise will talk about this, was really a creative genius. And he was also like the father figure for these boys. So they really looked up to him. And I know that Alistair, who had very severe dyslexia, had tried various things. They tried a farm for him. They had tried sending him up to be a builder on the Gold Coast. He'd come back and he'd started building a place called Aluka next to their family home and used a lot of those funds to start the Arab. But without Robin and without Graham, none of this would have come into being. It was the creation of these three brothers that had such a big input. But the home was just filled. It had one big map, which was a map of the world with all their travels. And so it was no surprise that they would capture this incredible international spirit. They were really citizens of the world. And not only that, that they were seed sowers who attracted all of these extraordinary characters that filled our lives, that went on to form so many incredible businesses, which we'll talk about a bit later, actually. The way they sowed these seeds, and I'm sure Deborah will talk about how that creativity really changes things. But from the Arab, a couple of years, you know, my mother was one of the waitresses there wearing bikinis. Helen met Robin around there. Both of our mothers were extraordinary creative talents themselves. And one of the things about the Smiths was that it wasn't about just these three people. It was all the people that they drew in that had an important part in creating these incredible creative ventures. I'll say a bit more later, but I don't want to say.
No,
I'll hand to Lara, because Lara.
Yeah, let's hand over to Lara.
Thank you everyone for coming. I just want to say thank you to the organisers and to Deborah, because you've managed to do something that none of us family have been able to do, which is get together. So, we all kind of live in different places. My brother's come down with Keddy, his partner, and little baby Anita there from Cairns, and Barney's come from Tasmania with Harry, and Emma's boys from Melbourne, and Lise from Melbourne, and Iman's from Sydney, I think. Is that right, Iman? Yeah, and Sarah's from Melbourne. And we've never all been together in a space like this. So it's pretty...
I think that's brilliant.
Thank you all for coming. I think I've been thinking about this proposal, this work of art that Deborah has made, because I'm really interested in history, and I love history. I know Barney is very much a family historian and probably has more knowledge of the actual ins and outs of it than I do, but I sort of have been studying it and thinking about it a lot because I love that sort of idea of going back in time. And the one thing I've felt about the Wild Colonial and the Arab, because I was born in '68, so I was probably really too young to appreciate that Genesis period, but is that really an amazing thing happened when the war ended. And so the Second World War, which was a very strong, important narrative in our family's history through my grandfather, George Smith, was, this terrible period of destruction for the whole world. And then after the war, when it finished, and Granddad was in the war from 39 to 46, so he stayed on after the war, was this rebuilding and regrowth period that happened in the 1950s. And it had to be done in a way that was very recyclable, and I think one of the reasons why the boys worked on building Caprington was because there were no builders, there were no materials. It was really hard, it was a very hard world. It wasn't like today where you get your credit card and you can go and buy a whole lot of stuff at Bunnings and build a shed. There was just nothing around to build anything. So that was the first thing. So you had to be very resourceful, I think that's the word I'm looking for. And you had to be have a lot of ingenuity. You had to be very collaborative, because you could never do that on your own with no resources. So that sort of can-do aspect of it is really important. And I think the other important thing is that there was really very little compliance. So in today's world, we can't do anything without 101 papers to fill in and bureaucrats to please and all this stuff. Well, in those days, it wasn't really like that. If you had an idea and your family were for it, and our family have always been very happy for you to be unconventional, it could happen. And so I think these boys had this beautiful situation where they had all of these ideas, they could support each other and do incredible stuff, but they had this willing world as well that allowed these dreams to materialise. And everyone was just, I think, pretty over the destruction of the war, and there's this whole new technology starting, new music starting, music changed dramatically. And so it all just came together like in this kind of way that epochs come together. And that's sort of how I guess I see it, really.
And just to add to that, to your question as well, we're talking about the Melbourne Olympics, 1956, people coming from all over the world. And in the lead up to this, one of Graham's fabulous ideas was there was these incredible iconic photos, mainly of Graham and some with Alistair, all over the world, holding a menu saying Aaron, with no explanation. And they were posted in magazines that were coming out. So in the lead up, people are talking, what is this place? What is the Aaron? There was no description that it was even a cafe. And so the combination of opening at the time of the Melbourne Olympics, people from all over the world, the cast of West Side Story, which had just come out, were all down here at Lorne in a lot of the iconic pictures you're seeing there outside the Arab and then outside the Wild Colonial on the big cart, what were part of that fusion and that creation. And Deborah will be sharing some of what she's taken from that. And we're so grateful for what she's infused into this beautiful creation.
Thank you, Emma. And Deborah, talking about Deborah, can we turn to you? Can you talk to us about your journey through the Arab, the Wild Colonial Club and the ABON?
Yes.
And what it all means to you?
Yes. Well, I'm going to stand up because I like to stand up. Because I might have to wave my arms around a little bit. So being invited by Graham Wilkie to be part of the Biennale and being able to choose the site of the Wild Colonial Club and the Arab, and then finding out about the ABOM on Mount Buller was just like a dream come true for me. So at first I thought, well, it's just a fabulous sort of, you know, music and funky 60s and all that stuff, cappuccinos and spaghetti and surf culture. And I thought, well, you know, I was sort of thinking on a superficial, that's good enough, you know, that's brilliant in itself. And then Marnie Fenton said that she knew Maxine, and she remembers seeing a photo of Maxine in the 60s and Emma walking across the street. I think she said Emma was on her hip, but anyway, so you know, she was a groovy hippie chick. Well, was she? Yes. And she had a young daughter, and so that's her memory from the 60s. And so she put me in touch with Maxine, and it was just blew my mind. So I spoke with Maxine at length, and she told me everything that she shared about the time here and Graham being overseas, being a ballet dancer, because you know it just opened my eyes that in the 40s and 50s, when Graham was a young man, he was a young man who wanted to dance. Now that's in itself unusual. And his dad was a bit strict, so Graham's doing it right on his own and looking after the other two boys. From what you told me. So I'm just saying this is the research I've done. So in my mind, I'm seeing then Graham goes overseas to be a really well-known dancer. He danced with Margot Fonteyn, yes? Yes. And so, you know, he was dancing in London, he was dancing in New York. That's your job to say more about that. And, but he was sending back to the boys here, to Alistair and to Robin, all the latest, amazing, funky, latest stuff from overseas. So here you've got Lorne, which is a sleepy little town, suddenly being like the centre of the universe, because we've got the latest from London, and then, so that was sending, he was sending back ideas, he was sending back drawings, and the boys were putting it into action. And of course it was inspiring to the community because they were getting on board. So we've got the Arab, and then a little bit later the Wild Colonial Club. And the thing that I get from all of these stories is how theatrical. So Graham is he's a theatrical man, and he's thinking theatrically. So he's thinking the Arab Cafe will have people here, or we'll have a cappuccino machine for starters. The second cappuccino machine in Victoria, and the first one is in Pellegrini's. So watch out. And oh no, what am I saying? I'm thinking about coffee now. Anyway, so the Arab Cafe, as I'm imagining it through Graham's eyes, is like a stage set. So you've got people here having their coffee and spaghetti, very wonderful. And then there was another area which had a sort of Bedouin, you know, cushions and stuff. So other people who wanted to lounge around, and they were there, and they were like the, what's the word, entertainment. They were like the entertainment on the stage for these people here. So I've got an amazing, a blown up version of a menu that Murray sent me, and I want to read you something from it. Anyway, so then you've got the Arab, which is already a theatrical wonderfulness. Then you've got the Wild Colonial Club, which is, you know, they've repurposed this building, wooden building down on the foreshore. And Graham, once again, his instructions are, you don't just walk in the front door like you would in any other building. You have to climb up a ladder. No, sorry. You buy your ticket for 5 shillings outside. You then climb up a ladder on the outside of the building and go up onto a mezzanine. And on the mezzanine, it's like, you know, it's a da-da, you know, I'm here. So, and down below you, you're on the mezzanine, you've been on the ground, you're up here, and then you have to go down again, but that's part of the whole theatricality of it. So So then you're up here, making an entrance, everybody can see you, you can see everybody, the band and everybody dancing. And then you have to go down these steps, which are wider than normal, so that you have to make an entrance. So I just keep thinking that Graham is he's just thinking from a theatrical perspective. Because he's overseas, he's not here. He's just doing it all. And,
So he got that off of a famous ballet dancer. I know this story.
Yeah, come on.
And she said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm fine right here.
No, okay.
But he said that, I think it was Margot Fontaine taught him, darling boy, it does not matter what you do on the stage. What matters is how you arrive and how you leave. And that's where that entrance concept came from.
Did
And
you
I
hear
think
that,
it was
everybody?
Margot Fontaine.
How you arrive and how you leave. It's not what you do in the space. Excellent.
I
Well,
had to interrupt because I actually know that part.
But that's perfect. And that's what I picked up on. That my job was to really create that feeling of a stage set. That wherever we are, it's a stage set and we need to then, perform appropriately. So then, and then the other thing, sorry, I know I'm going on. Is that Emma told me, we didn't know when she told me whether this was true or not, but I'm going with it, that at the launch of the Arab, there were camels, well, a camel, and I've got 3 camels. We got a camel walking down the main street, because it's the Arab Cafe, a camel. People dressed as Arabs, and the surf lifesavers carrying their best lifesaver on a surfboard down the main street to launch the Arab Cafe. So as soon as she said camels, I'm like, gotta get camels. So tomorrow...
I actually got an email at 4 in the morning. I read it the next morning. You'd been up thinking about it, right?
Yeah, no, that's right, I was. So we got camels, I got camels. So tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we're starting at the Surf Lifesaving Club. We're doing a little reenactment. If you want to be an Arab, come and join us. Or if you just want to join us walking down the beach, absolutely. It's going to be brilliant. And then, because the camels are here, we can ride on them or pat them or something. So, one more thing. One of the things I thought about was, and Murray told me that there were beach poets in the 50s, so I've got a beat poet coming tomorrow. So I've got camels, we've got a beat poet. So if you're around, no, not Adrian. Not Adrian.
Why not?
Yeah, so the events that I've had, at first I thought, we want to have 50s jazz and we want to have 60s, funky groovy. But what's transpired, and I think it's actually better, is that we've got something that's more of this day. So we've got fabulous psychedelic lighting from my friend Hugh McSpedden, which is fun, wasn't it? And, we have local bands and, it's just really been a fun time, just bringing it back. And people have just loved it. Like, why haven't we had this before? Well, because the Smith family, and there's one more thing I want to say.
You can do 2 or 3 if you like, Deborah.
One of the things I thought about them is that the Smith family were audacious and, see the photos I've seen of them, of your family, are they're not normal people. And I don't mean that to be, that's not to diminish. They are grand thinkers. The 3 Smith brothers were like creators of extraordinary stuff. And it wasn't ordinary what they created, and it happened here in Lorne. And you could say that what they created has made Lorne what it is today. The energy that's here now is still absolutely. I mean, we had. Now I'm thinking of Graham Geddes. So Graham Geddes, the antiques guy, he got in touch with me and he said he was 3rd owner of the Arab. And he went went on to start a club called can't remember it, but like, which one? Catcher. Historian, the Catcher. So, that was a club in Melbourne, but like lots of things. And Emma will talk about the other things, so I'm going to stop now.
Yeah.
Because it's too exciting.
Wasn't that great? I mean, it's been great so far. I'm just sitting here really enjoying myself. And it takes me back to the 60s, and if there's one word to me that epitomises the 60s, it's the word groovy. And do any of you know, some of you remember the Young Rascals?
Yes.
Yeah, what we're doing now is grooving on a sunny afternoon. And on that note, we'll switch to Don, because Don did much better songs than grooving on a sunny afternoon. And Don, I'd like to ask you, what was it like playing in one of the top bands of the moment? And what was it like coming to play at the Wild Colonial Club?
Playing one of the top bands, very lucky. This was the deal. The Beatles hit Melbourne, or late 63, everyone starts up a Beatle band, as I did with some friends. Our lead singer, Rob Turnbull, whose name appears there, mine doesn't.
Can we change that? Can we change that? Too late.
And Rod's mother, Rod's parents were a result of a wartime marriage in England. The mother goes back to England. She's very young. And she sends Rod, she's about 37 then, or 38, and she sends him the Rolling Stones EP. That's not a long play, the EP, unreleased in Australia. And she says, you might like this band, I think they're going to be big. And we heard them. For a start, they're a lot easier to play. The Beatles, although fantastic music was difficult to play. Musically and technically, they had tight harmony. The Stones were straight out blues, which for us was a lot easier to nail. So we get on the Rolling Stones wagon. We're all through the winter of 1964. We're honing our act, dying a death in the early stages. Then the Rolling Stones hit. About October of 64, everyone wants a Stones band. We're the only ones in Melbourne doing it. So our work just exploded, and we were good. I mean, I'd come from a folk background, so did one of the other guys, so it wasn't difficult to play as such. It was in the showmanship, which Rod had. And then, unbeknownst to us, the Smith brothers I might add that from 1958 till we went down there at the end of 1964, they'd had trad jazz bands on, which had been the go, Acapella, Kenny Moore, and Frank Trainer, who some of you remember, he played there year after year, and the Smith brothers said, trad is on the way out, R&B, this stuff from England. They really didn't know either, the Smiths. So they asked around, and the only name coming up to them was ours. Spinning Wheels. So he approached us, and we were playing a job in Dandenong, I think, and he asked us if we'd go down to play at the Wild Colonial Club for the whole summer. I knew about it, the other guys didn't. I said, you've got to realise, guys, this is the coolest job in the world. To appear at the Wild Colonial Club every night, 6 nights a week for the whole summer, on £18 a week. I think if you got 9 or 10 quid a week, you're doing well. So that was how we went down there then, and then we changed our manager, who got us a really good deal with EMI Records, and we were due to go up to Sydney to record practically the week after we'd finished at the Wild Colonial Club. So we rehearsed the 4 songs we were going to record in Sydney. And we were playing every night of the week. We were a tight little band. We got up to Studio A in Sydney, which is about twice the size of this church. And the engineer said, you guys are tight. And I said, well, we've been playing every night the last 6 weeks, and we've got it down pat. So we were very lucky. We were the first in that sound. We weren't the best, but I'd like to say we were the first. And our first record got up to number 3 against all competition, Beatles, Stones, Frank Sinatra, you name it. Those days they didn't have charts, they just a company would lease a 45, correct? And whoever sold the most got to the top. Rock and roll music by the Beatles was number 1. I think it was World Without Love, no, something by the Seekers, then we were number 3. So that was a fantastic, it sold 17,000 copies. I don't know what that means, but and we got now for it, you know, it was all a deal between the manager and the company. We didn't care. It generated a lot of work for us. But can I go back before there? My family owned a house at Eastern View, right where the archway was, from 1930 until January 1983. It went in 2 seconds. My cousin was staying there, said they could see the fire coming out of Clark's Hill. You know Clark's Hill there, down by Spout Creek? He said it wasn't a fire, it was a ball. And he was out in the water and the house exploded before the fire even got there. It was whatever in the air. Okay, so we've been going down there every year since 1946. It was my first trip, which I don't remember. And in 1962, my older brothers came back and he said, there's a dance on in Lorne, which is fantastic, and I wasn't allowed to go, because I was... And I used to go down to the beach, right where the archway still is, and I could see the lights of Lorne. I'd be there. Anyway, then I was allowed to go in one night a week to visit and then I found out the Arab was there as well. And they had folk singers there. There was, the first year I remember, there was Paul Marks, who was unknown today, but he was probably Australia's first blues singer, guitar and blues. He was wonderful. He was singing there, along with Glenn Tomasetti, another well-known folk person from that period. And so I said, oh, I've got to sing. I've got to be a folk singer as well. And go down to the dances, you explained, 5 shillings in, up the ladder, and you looked down on the band, which often wasn't there. Alistair Smith told me later on that the music was changing anyway, but he said one night they got a call from... There was a man who used to run the door called Hans Grimus. I thought it was a made-up name, but no, that was his name. Grimus. I thought it meant dirty hands. I thought it was a joke on dirty hands. You guys know that one? Yeah. Yeah, it was, so Hans Grimus was on the door and Tony Vickers, it said, door ex-heavyweight Australian champion. And Tony was in trouble, Don, I'll certainly help out, mate. And he was like that. However, Hans ran back to the Arab and said, the band's been off about 3/4 of an hour and the kids are standing around doing nothing. Frank Trainer in Balmaga was a little opposite end of what the Smiths had done with the hall. There'd been a little bandstand at the end, they reversed it and put the bandstand down at the shore end where you came in and built a freestanding riser, so to speak. And there's a little stage at the back of the room, and they'd go in there, just necking long necks. So he said, well, this has got to go. But so then we went in, but you're right about those steps. They were about, you really had to step. As teenagers, we thought if we got under the steps, but no, it was all worked out. There was straight through. So, any more questions you'd like to?
No, that's great. That's great for the moment, Don. And great thing, Don has promised he's going to play one of the Spinning Wheel's greatest hits for us. So
well, let's rephrase that. The Beatles sing a medley of their hits.
Yeah.
I'll sing a medley of our hit.
Thanks, Don. And now let's go to Murray. And Murray, tell us about the Arab and the Wild Colonial Club and the impact they had on you.
Well, I'll just go back a step. I was a surfer as a teenager, surfing on the peninsula around Point Leo and Shore. Now, if you know those areas, the surf's good, but there's nothing there. There was one cafe, there was a pub in Flinders, there were 2 girls between Hastings and Flinders. That was the only kind of nightlife there was. And the surf was challenging in a way. So on Saturday nights in Melbourne, I was going out to nightclubs, discotheques, dances, places like Stonehenge, Penthouse, Bertie's, Sebastian's, the really top flight Melbourne discotheques at the time, and they were all really well fitted. They were as good as any nightclubs in Australia. So I came down to Lorne with my brother late one December. We had fantastic surf. I'd never seen surf like it. I'd never been to the beach where there were girls on the beach sitting on the wall watching. I'd never been to the surf beach where when you'd finished surfing, you could walk up in the main street and get a coffee or a hamburger or a toasted sandwich and go back down and watch. It was, compared to surfing places like Gunnedah Beach or Point Leo Beach, this was like a social, it was a real social belt to me. So we'd had a surf late one afternoon and we're up in the Surfers Point car park here, toweling off. It was late Saturday afternoon, and I could hear this thump, and I thought it was just the low tide shore break going thump on the beach. And I'm going, what's that thump? And my brother's going, what do you mean? I said, well, that thump. He said, oh, I don't know. I said, yeah, it's down the beach. And I looked down at the cypresses down there, and I could see these lights. And I'm going, it's coming from down there. And he said, oh, it's the Wild Colonial Club. I've gone, it's the what? He said, it's the Wild Colonial Club. They're probably doing a sound check. I'm going, what, mean there's a dance down there? He said, yeah, it's the Wild Colonial Club. I'm going, so I have a choice of where I can eat after I've surfed. I have girls to talk to. I have great surf. And I've got a discotheque on the beach. But this was just a revelation. I just couldn't believe it. Not surprisingly, I moved here not long after. I've been here ever since. But from then on, I was a regular at the Wild Colonial Club, which, apart from the details you've heard about the steps, the ladder outside, that was really naughty. Like, you've got to imagine, this is back in the day when the song Snoopy and the Red Baron was banned because it had the word bloody in it. So things were very conservative in parts. But so to get in, you climbed up a step ladder through a trapdoor, and girls would go up. They would giggle, they'd go up, you'd go, oh, okay, I'm next, and you'd go up after them. If you were a little bit on the timid side, there was a side door you could go in and walk around, but you didn't do that because that categorised you as someone who was a little bit soft. And then when you got in there was a giant meat safe hung from the roof with a 1,000-watt flash in it, like a strobe, but it would only come on, I guess, when Robin or Alice had decided. So you'd be dancing away and they'd hit it and just go, vroom, and you'd have like a white flash in your eyes for about 5 minutes after it. There were beds hanging from the ceiling. There were murals of old footballers. There were pieces of horses and carts. And I'm in there and it's like 1967, and then someone's explaining to me, it was like this in 1958. Okay. I've been to lots of really wild night spots in Melbourne, and the Wild Colonial was the equal to all of them, without a doubt. And it showcased the best bands in Australia and other bands which were famous around the world. And it just did it for 10, 15 years. It was just astounding. And I'm sure there's people here who can tell some wonderful stories. I've heard some sensational stories about what happened in and around the Wild Colonial nights here on the beach. And I'm sure there's people here who, now they're older, probably don't feel quite so bad about telling us about them because their kids aren't here to be appalled. But you had you go to the Arab and have a toasted sandwich. The Arab was the first place I went to where the wait staff were cooler than the customers. And I think that whole coolness of the wait staff, anywhere in the world, I think started in the Arab and spread, because it was girls in jeans with bikini tops, little blue and white butcher's aprons, a menu that changed every year. It was different every year, and was a work of beat, poetry and culture. Every year was different and collectible. You'll see some of them come up here. There's a really big one there, and they have a fantastic menu. There was an item called a porgy from Porgy and Bess, there was a 007 when things got more mod. It was a changing thing, and it was just, to be here was a revelation for me. I've got no doubt that until, say, the Second World War, Lorne was a pretty coastal town, like Queenscliff, like Sorrento, but it's not now.
Thanks, Murray. Now,
Could I just,
go on.
Before all that happened, when we had, as I mentioned, we had our house at Lorne, in the 19, I was about 9, 10, 56, I was 10, and we'd only go into Lorne to buy meat and to get some greens and back, because there was nothing else in Lorne to see other than the annual trip into the fun parlour, which was where the dance hall was. And I remember sitting in the back of the car and we were going slowly past the Arab, and there was a couple of young men sitting outside on one of the tables. One of them had shoulder-length hair. It was probably Dick Barnes, who played the bass with Frank Trainer. We used to call him Dirty Dick Barnes, and he was a potter. He had died in 56, 57, here. And my mother looked at him. My mother was the reincarnation of Barry Humphrey's mother. So she said, failed law student. Because she had read the law. So that was all you went to Lorne for. And then, but you could see it was happening. At 56, that was the year it opened.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah.
I can add another one to
Yeah,
that.
go on,
Almost the same vein. My mother-in-law was walking along the street, and she'd been in Lorne since the 50s with her sister. And as they walked past the Arab, there were two people sitting on the footpath in the gutter, not in the gutter, but sitting on the edge of the curbing. And my auntie said to my mother-in-law, whose name was Pat, she went, "Pat, look, beatniks." And it was like, oh yeah, you're right, they're beatniks. Because beatniks were sort of like some really strange kind of creature that had come out of some place that was far away from Lorne. You have to remember that Lorne in the day, for 40 weeks of the year, was just a small country town. But once the summer came round, it ran through to Easter, and it was just this vibrant place that was known right around the country.
Murray.
Go on, Emma.
I was just going to say, building on that, what I really saw they created was a movement and a following. So the staff, again and again, were the coolest people around the block, and in fact on the radio 774 someone called in and said that he begged to be able to work there and he'd do it for free for a month, as long as he could sit on the staff table, by the end of it all. But that was what I saw, that they were, not only was it this fusion of what was at the cutting edge, the creative edge, the architectural edge, and I'll speak a bit more about that in the design of the A-block, but also this became the heart of just something that carried people in their lives. There was a vision and there was something to be part of that was bigger and greater than anything they'd experienced. And I think we got to see that because as children growing up around it, so many of those people, like Don, who was the manager of the Wild Colonial Club and the bouncer for 5 years, they've stayed in our lives ever since. And so there was a way in which they were attractors, but also these were the seeds, and I know Deborah talked about this, how creativity, there's seeds that come from that. So whether it was Campari or Tamani's or Brunetti's or Roger Meadmore, who started the Pancake Parlour, who worked at the Arab and the A-bomb, it just sent these seeds out. And it really struck me at Alistair's funeral. Don spoke, but everyone that just spontaneously spoke about how that time in their lives had stayed and then kind of been such a creative force driving them forward. And Alistair went on to do, he started an unemployment project, he started a school that won awards, and he in fact had a couple of other music concerts along the way to support all these events. But that's what I saw again and again, was creating this huge kind of wave that everybody wanted to be part of. So it was sociological, it was cultural. The A-bomb was designed in such a way that everybody could look down into the kitchen. They could see the pancakes being tossed. They could see the workings in the back of the kitchen. So the kitchen became, to that point, this creative, this dramatic event that kept everybody compelled. And once more, the musicians followed up there. So, you know, Shirley Strawn, he was often sitting in the back of the kitchen at the A-bomb and then going out and playing with his band before Skyhooks. So that whole tradition just kept rolling on through all these different events that played out. But I think Doc's got some great stories. Could we hand him the mic? Or?
Yeah, Doc, do you want...
Well,
Do you want the mic?
So, there were all these accomplishments, but essentially, before I ever met a Smith, I asked a girl, there was an advertisement in the paper for a waiter at The Abominable, and I asked somebody, you know about these things? She said, oh, they've got the best place in the Alps in Australia. They're most ethical people. And their office was the front bar at Pellegrini's. So they all did all their business in that little part where the window is at Pellegrini's, and I went there and went on trips going up to Mount Buller. Everybody would meet at Pellegrini's. And but what you haven't heard tonight is that they were really fabulous men. They were really very honest. They didn't bully. Nobody ever bought Alistair a coffee. No matter whether he had $1 or didn't, he always bought everybody's coffee. He treated everybody really well. And he was a really highly motivated guy. In particular, yes, Graham came up with the ideas, but Alistair was so motivated. And there are stories where in his early times he was a little bit slow as a builder. But later on, everything was tuck, tuck, tuck. So I was standing there making pancakes too slowly, and I got a hip and a shoulder, and he was making the pancakes. And I was somewhere up on the floor. In Lorne, they had a fight with the gang from Eastern Beach, and they called Robert Rat's Eyes. So the next year they painted in the Arab Rat's Eyes to get back to the gang from Eastern Creek. And I was carrying the money over from the Wild Colonial. And the Rat's Eyes gang got me in the street and knocked me down, and I had a huge amount of money. And Alistair saw what was happening, and he said, "How dare you do that to Doc?" And he started to spit as he got more and more angry. And my impending doom was looking really grim there. And suddenly these fellas back were all off, oh, I can't cope with the spit. But he actually really saved me from quite a big bashing. I'm talking about Alistair first because he was a real dynamo, very brave. One day he was sitting in the toilet at Mount Buller and he heard a cry for help, the storm, and he walked out across Skyline or whatever run it was, and he dragged some bloke back in who had been totally lost and out of his way. I have all these great memories, you know, when the surf first breaks, Robert and Alistair would body surf and get those waves. They were incredibly fair, they didn't bully people. It's sad they're not here now, and one of the boys from the the spinning wheels was very friendly with Robert, Glenn, and I'll take a moment, but so sad he went early, as did both Robert and Alistair, but they were really fair men. With Alistair, at every party we went to, his position was always in the kitchen, washing everybody's dishes. Very humble. At a time when the world was filled with social climbers, these two kind of weren't in that, from my perspective, weren't there at all. They were just humble, kind. We had our moments. I got sacked more times than I got paid. Somehow we remained made friends and did road trips and all sorts of adventures. Robin became a bit of a footyologist. He had a deep love of sport, which he passed on to Darcy. And Alistair had this love of beauty. I remember once I went to his house, Don Hirst, the Premier of South Australia, was living next door, and he had these foundry bowls. And he loved those, no matter how you stood near the bamboo and the bowls. It was just extraordinary beauty, and that's what motivated him, and it appeared to be what motivated him in all the projects, to make something really beautiful, something really work, something that was different. And although at first in the Arab, a lot of people used to walk out and not pay, somehow it was such an incredible enterprise that they survived it all. But as at first at Mount Buller there was no electricity, so everybody had to whip huge amounts of cream by hand, cutting up the stuff, putting it in the cold water and the hand mincing. But that guy, Hans Grimmers, he first arrived as a ski loader at Mount Buller, and they went out, saw he had nothing, took him coffee and clothes. That's the kind of people I remember them being, always helping people, never distinguishing between the rich and the poor, and not bullies. There was no kind of all the crap that occurs now in the workplace. And from where I saw, everybody worked very loyally, so inspired by their leadership. But Al did have this extraordinary vision. He went on, despite his handicaps, to get a degree. He's the first Victorian of the year. He was a real dynamo, and he loved his brothers, he loved Graham. And Graham and Al responded. And Robin also just played his determined part. Really nice guy, I found. They were special blokes, and it was a different time. A lot of people there were not, at that time, were fighting over money and position in a way that just seemed to not be an issue. I could tell you many, many stories, but...
Well, thanks very much, Doc.
Got my mojo working. I've changed the tempo from its original because it's too hard. Got my mojo working, but it just don't work on you. I got my mojo working, but it just don't work on you. I'm gonna love all the women. Here's the chorus. I got my mojo working, got my mojo working, got my mojo working, mojo working, got my mojo working. I got my mojo working, I got my